Hey, welcome to the show, everybody. It's Wednesday, which means it's time for another awesome episode of the Leadership Toolkit. As you know, the definitive leadership podcast for your personal growth, your leadership growth, so you can impact first yourself, because that's what you need to do to be able to impact and grow the people around you. Today's going to be no different. I'm very excited to have Patrick Francey on the show. He is one of the OGs of real estate investment. He actually runs the Real Estate Investment Network. He's involved in real estate education, entrepreneurship, personal and professional development. He's a gifted speaker. He's got an amazing podcast, and I am going to have him on the show with us right now today. Welcome to the show, Patrick. Thanks for joining me.
Mike, I'm happy to be here. Looking forward to our conversation today.
Absolutely. Me too. And so I don't forget to put it on the screen, because I managed to do this. I get into these conversations. Make sure you check out Patrick's podcast as well. It's the everydaymillionaire.ca. And so I'll have some other links we'll share throughout the show. So do me a favor, Patrick, if you would. Obviously, one, I'm very thankful you took the time to come on the show. I'm really excited about what you have to share. Would you just spend, maybe 2-3 minutes sharing sort of your background, what's your story, what's your background in leadership and management, and where are you at now?
Well, thanks, Mike. My story in business starts, 40 years ago. I've been literally in business on my own for 40 years. And that came from, back in the day in a particular part of Canada where the economy got shut down. And the only job I ever had as a young man, lost that job. I was laid off, and I pivoted, had my first entrepreneurial accident. And to this day, I still own that particular business. And, it grew to where it is today. And we've done different iterations of that particular business. But ultimately, that's still, we celebrated our 40th anniversary. Along the way, I've had other entrepreneurial accidents, so end up owning multiple businesses. And that was part of my own journey, realizing that I love to do business. I love the aspect of being an entrepreneur. I love the aspect of going to the next level of being a business owner. And I do define business owner different than being an entrepreneur, although I know that they can get mixed together. But ultimately, I wanted to own a business that operated whether I was there or not. I've accomplished that a couple of different times. And so over the years of my own journey, I got involved in investing in real estate over 25 years ago. I was a part of a community called the Real Estate Investment Network. I ended up buying that business again, which was not my intention when I started investing in real estate. It became my other entrepreneurial accident. So those are two businesses that I owned for a long time. 8 years ago, I started the podcast, The Everyday Millionaire, which is really born from the understanding that many people strive to achieve that millionaire status, and very few people do. Although $1 million doesn't sound like a lot of money these days, especially when our government's talking about trillions and billions and, what's a million? Well, ultimately, I sat on the beach one day and it came to me that after having some pressure to write a book, which I didn't want to do, I decided to start a podcast. And that was 8 years ago. And it was because I realized that so many people I knew were, in fact, real millionaires, and they just quietly did their thing. And I referred to them, I guess, as everyday millionaires. No fanfare. They just, methodically worked through the process of growing their net worth, creating financial futures. And, along the way, I started investing in real estate and realized that this is kind of cool and that there are others that could learn. So that's kind of the very high level note of me, is that I've been an entrepreneur, like I say, for 40 years and a business owner. I now live in the lower mainland of British Columbia with my amazing wife, who's a Olympic and world-class mental performance coach. And together we do some coaching and to entrepreneurs, and as well as continue with the Real Estate Investment Network.
I love it, man. Thank you so much for sharing. And again, thanks for making your time to be here today. You mentioned, I'm interested just on a total side note here. You said your wife's a Olympic mental performance coach. You do some coaching. What are there specific sports or specific things that you coach there?
So many years ago, when I started my first business, or when I had my first entrepreneurial accident, it was it was a small business called Professional Skate Service, which is now Pro Skate. So we were in the ice hockey and figure skating space, and we excelled at that. We did some real performance boutique kind of shop stuff. Actually, I know your location was Colorado. It was one of the stores opened in Colorado many years ago as part of the journey that I went on as an entrepreneur, and was licensing the business back then. So that was the first part of the business. We were entering into the competitive nature of ice hockey and figure skating. And that's where actually I met my wife many years ago. So she was a skating coach. She worked for a couple of different NHL teams. One was the Edmonton Oilers as a skating coach, as a power skating coach, if you will. And then she went on to work for St. Louis Blues and certainly built a very robust business, if you will, also teaching amateurs in terms of their power skating and all of that. Now she owns that business today, although she hasn't been on the ice for many years. That's what she does. Now, having said all that, that morphed into working with competitive figure skaters in ice dance. And that has been over a number of years now. She's been to, I think she's coming up to her 4th Olympics. She's on her journey to. She just got back from Paris, which is Summer Olympics, which is an interesting story because there was controversy 2 years ago in Beijing, with the team event in skating. And so there was a hold put on awarding medals. There was a bit of a doping scandal. Who was it? Blah, blah, blah. Long story short, that all got resolved. And the Olympic Committee said, well, let's hand those medals out at the Summer Olympics. Let's make it a big deal because it's important to these athletes. Now, the interesting part of that story, by the way, is Stephanie Hanlon is my wife. She works with, a number of teams, her and her business partners out of Montreal, Canada. But in Paris, they actually were supporting the U.S. gold medal team in Paris skating. Evan Bates and Mike just lost his partner's name.
Okay.
Bad me. Anyways, it'll come to me in a second.
It'll show up like 3 minutes later.
Yeah, it'll show. Anyways, long story short, as she also received, her and her 2 coaches also received it's a medal. I think it's the Order of Icos, with Icos, IKOKS or something along that line. Anyways, which is a U.S. medal that she received for outstanding coaching. So because you're US based, I share that story, but she's working with 14 teams from around 15 teams from around the world. And she's awesome. Not a technical coach. She's a mental performance coach. She helps them see through that stuff. Although she's not a psychologist, we just want to shine a light on that.
No, I think it's cool. I was actually a partner in a roller skating rink here in Colorado Springs for a dozen years. And I did ice and roller hockey for almost 20, was a USA hockey referee. So that's a unique
by the way,
connection.
Because Evan Bates and Madison Chalk. So I mean, it would be just so bad of me to not have that name, given that I was just with them recently.
No, it's awesome. And thank you for sharing that. Do me a favor. I'm curious. I love the statement that you've made a few times. You've said they're entrepreneurial accidents. Mm-hmm. Why do you refer to those as accidents?
Well, I think, it wasn't like I sat down one day and said, what business should I start? Am I going to look at a franchise? What do I want to do? It wasn't any of that. It was really, circumstances were that I was working with somebody who had asked for my help, and I was working with them because part of what I do is coaching and business development and personal and professional development. And they were in a spot where they needed some support. I went in to support them, and then one thing led to another, and I bought those businesses. And that's both happened with ProSkate, for example, and with REIN as another example, a startup, a multi-million-dollar startup that we did in 2006, same kind of scenario. They were doing the startup, it was very innovative, it was in the industry. They reached out, said, would you be interested in consulting? And then that turned into a whole new business venture. So the point of that entrepreneurial accident is because it wasn't intentional. It was literally, okay, this is cool, accident, here's how things unfolded. And that's really where that came from. And that led into what my wife Stephanie and I do today, which is a lot of coaching around small business owners and personal and professional development. Because what we've learned over the years, Mike, and I'm sure that you've seen this many times, is that as much as we can share tactics and strategies and how-tos and what to do, if you can't figure out who you need to become to achieve those goals, to achieve that vision, you aren't going to get anything done. And I've learned that over the years of working literally with thousands of real estate investors, one-on-one, one-on-many, small group, big group, doesn't matter. And we teach a process, we teach a system for how to invest in real estate, why to invest in real estate, helping people set goals. And I was like, why is it that some people just crush it? They build that, financially certain future investing in real estate, which is the goal, or they generate income, which is the goal. They're all learning the same thing because it's a system and process that we teach, for 30 years. And why do some people nail it and others don't? And that really came back to understanding who you are in that personal and professional development, that visualization, or the who do you need to become to achieve the goal?
I love the question. Who must you become? I think that's a really good question. One thing that you said early on, and I want to go back here just a little bit. There's a few things when you were saying that, and the reason I guess I keyed in on it, the entrepreneurial accident, made me think of Bob Ross, right? Happy accidents when you're going through. He says, like when it's, you sort of, it's, I guess, business ownership and entrepreneurship's a little bit like painting, right? You start off with nothing and you figure out, how am I going to do this, right? So it's that was what that triggered in me. One of the things that you commented, you said, I do think there's a difference between a business owner and an entrepreneur. And we talk a lot on this show about, entrepreneurship, leadership, management, and sort of where those lines cross. From your perspective, what is the difference in a business owner versus an entrepreneur?
I look at an entrepreneur, and if anybody's ever read the book, or if they have not, I recommend it, which is the E-Myth, or the E-Myth Revisited. And it really speaks to what I kind of keyed into many years ago when I was still working in the business of Pro Skate, for example, my boutique skate shop, and trying to build franchise and do all the things. I was really in it. I was the technician, if you will. And, through that was a lot of stress, a lot of to do, and how do you grow and how do you expand? And one day it was a classic question of a comment made by a good friend of mine who I admire as a business owner. And I was being very stressed one day, and he was actually in the store. He was talking to me, and I was stressed. And he goes, Patrick, let me give you a little bit of guidance, if you will take it. And he says that the day you start working in your business and start working on your business is the day that you will start to grow and expand. Now, of course, that comment for me back then was, holy cow, that was quite profound. Now, we know today that it's a pretty common comment to be made. So ultimately, what I got to after reading the E-Myth and listening to things, guys, and reading guys like Robert Kiyosaki, was that as an entrepreneur, I'm a technician. I'm in it. I'm responsible. I'm doing it all. As a business owner, what I'm doing is developing and growing a business. And literally now to this day, my business is another province in another city, and I haven't had a key to my store, since 2006, I think was the last time I had a key recently. And I drop by every so often, and we get on, meetings every couple of weeks and touch base and go over financials, et cetera. But my job was, as a business owner, to put the right team in place and then to be able to support that team. And, recently I would stop by the store, and I walked in the back shop, and, a young man came up to me and said, "Excuse me, sir, you're not allowed back here. You have to go to the front." And I went, okay, that's a cool place to be. And so, I've got a great general manager. I've got he's got great teammates. I've got great accounting. And so that for me is being the business owner. And that business has continued to do very well. We went through some tough times like many businesses did through the lockdowns of the pandemic. But because I had the team in place, it really was me getting on calls, troubleshooting, strategizing, using my experience to guide the team, making the tough decisions. And that's how we continue to roll today.
I love that. So that leads me to a few more questions. I told you I sit here and I take notes and I listen. That's what sometimes I'm sure my audience sees. They know the top of my head better than they know my face, because I'm sitting here going, oh, okay, that's good. So would you say the goal is to move from being an entrepreneur into a business owner? Is that a graduation, or how does that?
Well, I think that, like anything, is that when we're the technicians in the business, everything depends on us. And so not everybody strives to be a business owner. Some have different views of that. But for me, I wanted to grow the business as an asset, that either one day I would exit, or one day, I'm 66 years old. I have I'm on the Freedom 95 program. I have no intentions of ever quitting what I'm doing because I love it, as does my wife. But there's things that I want to do, which is not necessarily in the day-to-day operations of any business. Now, this particular business, I love it. It's been 40 years. It's part of the community in Edmonton, and the team is really great. But ultimately, it's an asset for me that one day, if I want to slow down, I can draw my income. I can do anything I want with that business. I'm not really intending to sell it or exit it in the near future, because I got a great team of people who love operating the business. I pay them well. I do my best to look after them. That's my job as the business owner, is to build that asset. Now, as an entrepreneur, in my definition, and that's how I see it, I become the operator. The problem with that is, and something I've learned, is that, if I'm not spinning all the plates, they start to come off the posts, they start to fall down. So for me, it was really about growing and building the business in a way. I don't consider myself, as much as I wear the hat of a CEO, and I'll share with you this insight that I've learned about myself. I'm not as good as a CEO as I am the support of a CEO. I love the role that I can play. And, if a CEO comes to me and goes, and I've worked with many, is that, here's my vision, I can get behind that. I'm the guy that gets behind it. I make sure my hand's on their back, pushing them up that mountain that they see that they want to climb. I'm there to make sure they don't fall backwards and provide some guidance and some support. But I'm not necessarily the person that wants to lead the path or take the path. I can create the vision, but I'm not the guy that wants to climb the mountain on my own. So if that starts to make sense, that's who and how I'm built, and that's what I like to do. So for me, an entrepreneur is very much a technician, very much in the operations of it. And while that worked for me for many years, by the way, I did a lot of that. My goal was to always exit the business on a day-to-day basis.
That's very strong definitions and description. I'm curious then, because one of the things that's very interesting, I've interviewed over 100 different leaders, different verticals of business, different styles of leadership. Yours is unique. Many leaders, they want to be, well, I'm going to go down the path. I've got to take out my machete and cut the way for everybody else to come down. And it seems, as you're saying, you're more of a support style role. You're like, hey, I can get in behind it, but I got to find somebody else to support that. So I applaud you for that. I think that's really, really powerful. And the reason I bring it up is because I want people that are listening. I often advise people, make sure you take notes, right? People to listen and take note, that there's so many different opportunities to lead. It's not always about, in your words, you said, I'm not the one to lead the pack, or, be out climbing the mountain, but you've got all of these other duties. And I think that's just phenomenal.
Well, I think there's an understanding around it, Mike, is that, my own leadership skills have evolved, and I've developed over the years, and techniques of creating culture with teams. I'm very good at that kind of aspect of it. But there's a part of me that I know what I'm good at, and I know that what I'm not so good at. And this also goes back to a lot of years of learning that, number one. And some of it is admitting that. So there is a part of it that we have to understand ourselves better as we go along, and then be able to kind of acknowledge that, something, this is not my strength, or maybe it is your strength and you still don't want to do it. There's a lot of things that I'm good at. I don't want to fricking do it. And there's a part of me that is just being honest with myself in that regard. And so I don't have the ego around it anymore, but that's taken time to evolve. When I'm coaching young entrepreneurs and business owners, I'm watching for those kinds of things. There is a statement that many are familiar with, of course, which is, don't be the smartest person in the room. And there was a place where I was often the smartest person in the room. And it took me a long time to figure out that this is the last room I want to be in. I need to be in rooms with people smarter than I am, that challenge me, that can tell me what's going on so that I can make decisions. I'm way happier doing that. And then ultimately, I love building culture and team and environment for the team to really excel and succeed.
Well, and I think that's fantastic. I do think too, if you're quote unquote the smartest person in the room. I've been in that seat, man. And one of the things that happens is it gets exhausting, right? Because you feel like you're constantly pouring out, and you're right. You do need to be in a room where you can have people pour back into you as well.
Yeah.
You brought up culture several times, and I'm curious, I'd like to give tangible things. Is there a way you could, put into words, what are 2, 3, 4 things that you would do from your leadership perspective, and for anybody that is listening, to what are 2, 3, 4 things that you would say, hey, take these actions because that contributes to building culture in an organization?
Well, I think there's a fundamental around it all, Mike, is that, as a business owner and as the individual that is going to lead the team, if we want to have people stay with us, if we want to be the most productive and to deliver front facing to the clients that ultimately that we serve, it means we want to attract the right people. Now, there's a phrase that I often use with our team, which is high performance as a result of low tolerances. And so who sets the tolerances? Well, if I'm the leader of that team, if I'm the owner of that business, I want to set the benchmark for performance. But how do I get buy-in? Well, first off, I'm going to sit down with the team and I go, okay, team, what is the working conditions that you want? So forget about environment directly. Who do you want to work with? What are the rules of engagement? How do you want to be? So I facilitate those conversations with my team at least once a year. And then we check in, which I then get together with the whole team. And I go, okay, what are some of the rules that we have as a team? What is the culture that we want to invite? Now, I facilitate that conversation. I am the pointy end of the spear. So I certainly lead it in a direction that I want it to go, but I also make sure that they get buy-in. I have buy-in because if I ask the right questions, they get to the conclusion that I want them to get to. And ultimately, what do we want? We want a non-toxic environment / culture. So they hit on things like no gossip, no blame, no complain, show up on time, have the other person's back, make sure that you're front facing and that this is how we treat the clients. And when we talk about environment, we want this facility to be clean. We want people to put their lunch away in the fridge and then clean it out on Fridays and make sure the sink is clean. So ultimately what we have is a group of people that get together that say, these are what we want as a culture, and that the culture is intentional. Then we have all that list put together and I get agreement. I go, okay, guys, do we all agree that this would be great working conditions, that this is the culture that we have? We have each other's back. We're not gossiping. We're not whining and bitching all the time. Are we all on the same page? And the answer is yes. Everybody initials that sheet of paper. I do a flip chart and we hang it up. And then that becomes the rules of engagement for the team.
No, I love that. So I'm just sitting taking notes. I love the fact that one of the things, and it's so foundational, the way you present it, because I think a lot of times we as leaders, it's easy to overthink, right? We look at, there's how many books written on company culture, and there's all kinds of different learning and YouTube, and what we can often end up at fault of is we'll read one book and go, well, this is the way, right? And then that doesn't work. And so a week later, it's a different one. And easily culture, your quote unquote culture, can become sort of a flavor of the week. And I think the foundational piece, and what I'm hearing you say, and I always repeat stuff a lot so that people have an opportunity to write it down, is, first and foremost, you got to attract the right people. I do love the fact that you said, high performance is a result of low tolerance. And then the second one that I wrote down that I thought is really big is it's that group buy-in. It's not you dictating or, hey, I'm going to orate and then dictate what it is that has to take place. It's because then it's a monologue, right? It's that dialogue that you're going back and forth and saying, hey, what's the sort of place that you want to work? Do you ever have to, as the leader, as the facilitator of those, do you ever have to push back, Patrick, and say, hey, no, we're not going to do that. That one doesn't work for us?
Not often, because it's a group discussion. I'm just facilitating. So, again, we want buy-in from everybody. And then ultimately there's discussion and there may be some debate and this happened and that happened. The important part of this is that when we talk about culture, I'll give you a classic example, and
Sure.
many will relate to this, is that there's some sales guy who's awesome. He's like the top sales guy, but he's an asshole. Everybody does
Been
not
there.
like him, but they don't want to get rid of him because, oh my gosh, he's responsible for 60% of the sales. If he goes, we're going out of business. And the
Sure.
reality of it is that while he's or she is being toxic, the rest of the people are not performing. The rest of the team is maybe even you're not, holding on to people, or they're coming to work and they're not loving their job. So, because of this one toxic individual. So the reality of it is, and what we've learned over the years is that when you create a culture, Mike, is that even the hiring process is different. When you have a conversation going, these are the rules of the engagement. This is the culture that we work in. Are you okay with that? And I share a story because it's relatively recent, which is my general manager, who's been with me many years and as have much of our team, as he phones me, he goes, oh gosh, I just interviewed a killer sales guy. He will be awesome. But he's got an attitude. I don't know what to do. I go, dude, why are you even having this conversation? You know exactly what's going to happen if you hire him. And, and he kind of goes, yeah, you're absolutely right. But here's the thing about it. Whether you believe in karma or universal law, when you create the space, when you're clear on your values, that opens up the opportunity for those people who actually embrace those values to show up and then be put in place. And so you get tested, I think, with those individuals that, oh, it's like putting, I'm going to make this square peg fit in this round hole. And ultimately it comes back to be a lot of work. You blow 6 months and then you end up getting rid of them, and the damage that they cause, they leave this huge wake and that disrupts everybody, and you're still without that person that you needed, and you've just blown 6 months. So all to say this is that the clearer we can be in our culture, mission, vision, our values, and align the team with those, the better you're going to be in attracting the people that you want within your business.
I think it's great. And the other thing to consider, man, I have so been in those situations, and it's always me. I like everybody. So I'm like, oh man, they'll be great. And fortunately I have people in my life on my team that are like, no, remember when we said this? Yeah, we're not going to do that. I think that's great. I also think one of the things that sometimes people miss, like what you're saying is, hey, it takes 6 months to get to this point to realize they were the wrong person, or you got to get them out, or whatever that looks like. But in that 6 month span, how many of the right ones did you miss?
Totally.
100%. And so, because generally once we've filled those spots, people stop looking, right? Or you're not looking immediately. And so it's one of those things too. And you said early on, and I want to touch on this because I don't think enough people realize how valuable this is. When you were talking about, okay, hey, this person may be toxic, they may not be good in the workplace, it's bringing down all of the other people. And so when you using the analogy, like, because in business, like when you cut that cancer out, everything else will heal around it. And I don't think, we've been in situations where hey, I've got this great salesman or saleswoman that they're just going to crush it. And how am I ever going to replace the 20 widgets that they sold, or the 20 cars they sold, or the number of skates, or the products? And the reality is, Bill over here will pick up 5, Sue will pick up 3 because they're in a better place. You'll have someone else come along. You'll find that right person, right? They fill in all of these other gaps. And so ultimately those waters rise for everybody that's around it too, right?
True. And the productivity starts to come back up, because what we don't notice in these environments or within the context of what's unfolding is how much productivity drops. I'm starting to shut my desk down, 15 minutes early before the end of the day, or I'm coming in and it's taking me 20 minutes to even make my first call. It starts to, that toxicity really shuts people down energetically. And so it's just great to make sure you have the right people in place, and not allow for that toxic individual to show up and, to your point, kind of impact everybody else.
Very powerful. One of the things I want to go back to, I still have 2 things that I have to get to before we get to the end of this show. And so one may come right out of left field because you said at the very beginning, but I'm going to hang on to it for a minute. one thing that I do want to move to, because you said, hey, we've been through some tough times in business too. And it's easy. People will tune into a podcast, they'll turn into a YouTube episode. And in, 3 minutes, you can see somebody blossom from, oh, I just got started to now I'm making millions, and all that. And we lose this concept of time when it comes to social media and YouTube and podcasting and all the things. But the reality is, if we go back, like you and I, and you commented, you said, hey, stuff changed, for example, during the pandemic. And not that I want to lean on the pandemic, but if you're working in a business that's, it seems to be brick and mortar more so, right?
That particular business is the Real Estate Investment Network is now virtual, but we were doing live events and doing all those things.
So when those tough times hit, because every business owner, every entrepreneur experiences them, every business owner, every manager, every leader, you're going to hit a wall. You're going to have something coming at you that you go, I don't even know how I'm going to deal with this.
Yep.
What advice would you give somebody when they see that difficulty coming at them? What are the first couple of actions they should take, Patrick?
Well, it's over 40 years, I can tell you that I have had many such times where you're scratching your head going, oh my gosh, how do I deal with that? And it could be changes in the industry, changes economically. When we look at what's happening right now, economically on a global scale, let alone what's happening in our specific country and or province and or city, we're having to pivot and do all of those things. There's a fundamental that I've learned over the years, which is a phrase that I use, which is, it's not the weight we carry that breaks us down, it's the way we carry the weight. And so first off and foremost, I think that it's so important to acknowledge or to sit back and really reflect on what's showing up from you and how you're carrying that stress. How are you carrying the weight of the challenges that you're facing? And whether it be financial or staff or economically, what's going on? And then what can you do and what do you need specifically to support your kind of challenge that you're facing? Is it the advice or the guidance of somebody else? Now, I shared this with you is that one of the challenges that many face in business is they feel like they're carrying the weight on their own. They're afraid to reach out and ask for help.
Absolutely.
I know for me, my ego was, well, that was a sign of weakness, asking for help. And so I had to bust through that and then really make sure that I have trusted individuals that I can pick up a phone. And sometimes, I've got a friend of mine who's not in the industry. He's not exceptionally, he's not a business guy, but I've known him for 30 years. And he's a guy that I can sit and I can have a conversation with. I can tell him what's going on for me, and he can mirror back how he's seeing things. And all it does is shift my perception and my perspective. And if I can get into an environment for me, and that's my suggestion to those who face it, you need to shift perspective, and you need to understand that our perception and our perspective is impacted by our perception. So Wayne Dyer used the famous quote, when you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change. And so how can we change how we're looking at things? And sometimes we just have to get out there, describe a scenario to a trusted friend or business associate, and then have them shift how we're seeing the world. That's where sometimes some solutions occur. But in order to get into that mindset, Mike, my experience with clients and my own personal experience is that we have to get our head right. Like, we have to say, okay, let's shed all of the weight and the drama and the internal conversations and the negative self-talk, all the things that we go through, to open up to hear somebody give you a different perspective.
Man, we get into these and it leads to so much good. I could probably do like a Joe Rogan style 4-hour podcast with you, Patrick. Just sit here and we could keep leading. One thing would continue to lead to the next set of conversations. I really, really like the statement. It's not the weight we carry, it's the way we carry the weight. I think that's extremely powerful. I also think, and just extracting from those moments and that piece of conversation, and I've done it, it's so important to have somebody that we can really lean on for, real perspective, not what it is that we see, or not that somebody that's not just going to tell us what we want to hear. Right. They're going to say, well, hey, here's how I see it. And a lot of times that may align. I imagine, but it's always, I love the fact that you said it's somebody that's not in the industry. So like they're
Totally
not
different
held back.
conversation.
Yeah.
They're not
They're
in it.
not held back by, oh, well, this is what's going on in the industry, so here's
Yeah,
what I think. They're just like, oh, that's dumb. Here's what you should be doing. Right.
yeah.
One thing, this is one of the things I want to go back to that you had said early on when you, and because you do so much coaching, and this is a leadership show, I think there's a lot of coaching found in leadership.
Mhm.
And what are 3 or 4 maybe specific attributes that you would say bridge the gap between coaching and leadership?
Well, that is a fine line, isn't it? Because even as a leader within my own team, I do a lot of kind of guidance and coaching, because I believe that within my own team is that I'm able to support my key people in growing and being their best self, which sometimes takes me sitting down with them, hearing their struggles, and seeing what's behind the scenes. So, in other words, you're having a conversation with somebody who maybe isn't doing what they want to do. They're not as good as you think they can be. As you have conversation, you start to understand there's some things behind the scenes. So then it becomes a little bit of a, okay, this is what's in your way. How are you carrying the stress of this? And so the fine line really is, I think, that coaching and leadership, or leadership and coaching, they
Hmm.
go hand in hand. And leadership sometimes is about making tough decisions or making decisions. Leadership is in times of, how do I inspire an entire team, or how do I coach the team in the guidance that they need to develop? So for me, along the way, as I'm coaching my team, I'm also doing it from a place of, okay, I'm leading the way. I'm guiding them how to be better people, how to be better professionals, how to embrace and why they should embrace how they, I guess, for example, in a front facing work with a client. Well, why do you need to show up that way? And how do we show up that way when we don't feel like it? And what is in our way of showing up like that? So back to these phrases of, that's not the weight we carry that breaks us down. It's the way we carry the weight. Now, if I share that with one of my team who has had something happen in their life at home, yet they've got to go and talk to one of the clients, how do they show up for that client without carrying that weight? It's understanding how to do that. So there is some coaching involved in that. Well, how do
Hmm.
I do that? This is really what's happening to me. And I got this big bill, or somebody wrote off my car. And okay, well, how are you carrying that weight, and how are you going to carry it through the day, or how are you going to carry it as you're working with client? That takes a little bit of coaching, which is also part of being the leader that somebody can come to and actually have that conversation and feel good about it, feel safe in having that conversation.
Again, phenomenal answer. One of the things that I'm hearing you say too is, you have to be willing to listen to people. Like, you have to have that conversation as a good leader and as a good coach. Oftentimes you have to be the one initiating that conversation. You got to ask good questions, and then you actually have to listen to the responses. I think sometimes, especially newer leaders, it's sort of surface. They say, well, I saw somebody else do this, and so that's what I feel like I should do. But as we
There's a,
grow,
something, Mike, it's interesting, and you've well read, and you do all the things that you do in your own leadership. But, there's all these little memes and quotes out there, and they seem, in the moment we read them and we go, oh yeah, that all makes sense. But the reality of it is they come from reality. So,
Mhm.
when they come from real life, and if we take a few minutes to really embrace them and consider them, back to your point, is, Stephen Covey said, seek first to understand and then to be understood. That guidance, that quote is gold. And I have to remind myself of that as much as I might remind others of that. It is
Sure.
ultimately, okay, shut the hell up, Patrick, and listen to this person. Like, really listen without thinking about what am I going to say next, which is a common problem with many individuals. Well, somebody's sharing a story, they're already, formulating their answer. Quit it. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. And I think if we do that with our team, that's good leadership.
That's great. No, what's, as you're speaking there, and my brain wandered to a time. I had a very close personal friend of mine who was mentoring, and I will just say, when I was a younger man, I was always thinking about, well, what's the next thing? What's the comeback? Well, I have to respond to that. And so it was almost as if he could see like my lips preparing, like what's the next thing.
Yeah.
And I remember him finally looking at me, and this is probably 20 years ago now. And he looks at me and he says, Mike, if you're so intent thinking about formulating your response, you can't possibly be hearing my question.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, that stung, because it was exactly what you're saying. Is it's like, well, okay, you're right, because I was so hung up on the previous statement. Well, how can I respond to that? Because I don't want it to be my fault, or I don't want to, move on to the next thing. And so we get tied up in that.
Well, we're all just mere mortals, and so we have that human experience. But
Sure.
if we're always working towards being the best version of ourselves, then it takes time to reflect, and we have to look at that and go, okay, here's somebody sharing their story about the experience they had, I don't know, in Colorado. Well, you talk to me about Colorado, and while you're telling me about Colorado, I'm already formulating the stories about the times I was in Colorado, and I went to Denver, and I was in Boulder, and all the things that I did at a baseball game, and well, what? So again, is that when we're trying and working to be the best version of ourselves, we have to reflect and go, is that appropriate? Am I being present to the conversation that I'm having with Mike? And so these are all things that we develop as strong leaders. Some people, I guess, are gifted at being leaders. I have to study it.
Sure. And I do think it's something that I think most anything can be learned. It's, at various levels, whatever that task, that title, that characteristic is that you want to learn, it's going to take time, and it's going to take effort, and it's going to take consistency. Right. Mm-hmm. So a couple, we're kind of coming to the tail end here. I'm going to remind everybody, make sure and check out, it's REIN Canada, REIN Canada, CANADA.com. It is .com, right? For more information on the Real Estate Investors Network. Also, please check out Patrick's show, his podcast. He's growing podcast, been doing it for 8 years, the everydaymillionaire.ca, spelled just like it sounds, ending in .ca. So make sure you check that out. I always try and plug those. So if you're listening to the audio podcast, you get that.
Appreciate
and then yeah, absolutely. And then Patrick, if you don't mind, any final thoughts sort of to take us out today? Any just nuggets of wisdom to close out with?
Well, I think in the nature of the show, around leadership, I think that leadership to me, and within the context of my podcast, 8 years later, I've had the real honor and privilege of interviewing some pretty successful people, like really, guys who have done it all. And I often ask the question, is it nature or is it nurture? And I say that around business, and I say that around entrepreneurship, but I also use that in the context of being a leader. And, without question, although there are many who have some real leadership tendencies because of how they were brought up, some of their study, most study being a great leader, which starts with being reflective, self-evaluation, asking and working with others to find our blind spots, and then being really clear on who you need to become to achieve the result that you want to achieve. And it's always about that. I shouldn't say always. That's a big statement to make. It's most often that you need to become the person that you want to be as a leader is a very conscious choice. It's a journey, and you have to start the process. And there's lots of techniques to do that, but ultimately it's intentional. Being the best version of yourself is an ongoing job. It's something we have to work at.
It's deliberate. No, I love that. Patrick, thank you so much for joining me today on the Leadership Toolkit. Ladies and gentlemen, Patrick Francey, appreciate you very much. If you would hang tight for just 1 second, I'm going to take us out. Okay.
Beautiful. Thanks, Mike.
Yep. Ladies and gentlemen, that's going to bring us to a close for another episode of the Leadership Toolkit. Thank you so much for investing your time with us today and listening to Patrick. I know that he had, man, such just a wealth of wisdom. I'm serious when I was saying, like, I could hang out with him for a whole afternoon. I know he doesn't have that kind of time, but just about everything that he shared led to something else that's just absolutely awesome when it comes to leadership, when it comes to management, when it comes to business and growth, individual personal growth. So do me a favor. One of the ways that this podcast grows is please share the show, share the video, share the audio, make sure you throw some thumbs up on it for me if you would. And most importantly, this has made an impact on you, or you know somebody that it could make an impact on. That's the key, is to help grow not just yourself, but the people around you. So share it with somebody that it'll make a difference for today. I thank you for joining me. And until we speak next, stay great, everybody. We'll talk soon.